Well, famously, Trump told John Bolton, "I don't give a shit about NATO."
There is a clear path to dictatorship in the United States, and it is getting shorter every day. New warnings, including from former Republican officials, about the risks of a second Donald Trump presidency. And new this morning, with Donald Trump surging in the polls, fresh sounds of alarm about what a second Trump presidency might mean. That's Robert Kagan, a former Reagan official, writing in the Washington Post. A second Trump term would instantly plunge the country into a constitutional crisis more terrible than anything seen since the Civil War.
Is essentially saying that the 4 indictments that Trump, is facing are Joe Biden weaponizing the Department of Justice to go against a political opponent in Donald Trump. And the thing to note here is that a lot of his supporters do believe this. They do believe that there is a 2-tier justice system.
I do want to ask you about this because there is a flipping of the script here where Donald Trump has gone after Joe Biden, saying he's the one that's destroying democracy, something that you see a lot, something that Donald Trump is accused of. He will then turn and put that on his opponents.
An unimaginable threat and a clear path to dictatorship. New warnings coming from Republicans this morning of what a second Donald Trump presidency could look like. Former Reagan official Robert Kagan calls a possible Trump second term a, quote, clear path to dictatorship in the United States. David Frum, former speechwriter for George W. Bush, saying it'll, quote, instantly plunge the country into a constitutional crisis.
But now he is trying to flip the script, saying that it's actually Joe Biden who is bad for democracy, and using an argument we have heard him make before, essentially saying that the 4 indictments against him are Joe Biden's way of using the Department of Justice essentially to attack a political opponent, that opponent being Donald Trump. Take a listen to what he said.
Joe Biden is the destroyer of American democracy, and it's him and his people. So if Joe Biden wants to make this race a question of which candidate will defend our democracy and protect our freedoms, and I say to Crooked Joe, and he is crooked, the most corrupt president we've ever had, we will win that fight, and we're going to win it very big.
All these new warnings about what could happen if there is a second Trump presidency. Robert Kagan writes, the country's on a clear path to dictatorship. David Frum says it could put the country in a constitutional crisis more terrible than anything seen since the Civil War. So Trump sees this, and his response, and we played the sound a little while ago, was to basically say, Joe Biden is the destroyer of democracy.
And he's trying now to convince people that Joe Biden is the threat to democracy, because that's why Donald Trump is being charged with these crimes, because Joe Biden's Justice Department is coming after Joe Biden's political enemy. There's no evidence, zero, that Joe Biden's Justice Department is doing this to achieve political goals for Joe Biden. That's not stopping Donald Trump. And significantly, John, it's not going to stop tens of millions of supporters of Donald Trump who believe wholeheartedly what he is describing here.
A vote for Donald Trump, quote, may mean the last election that you ever get to vote in. The warning just this morning from a former Republican member of Congress about a second Trump presidency. The alarm bells are going off this morning in a new way. New urgency in the chorus of concern now for what a second Trump presidency would mean. Former Reagan official Robert Kagan calls a Trump second term a, quote, clear path to dictatorship in the United States. And former speechwriter for George W. Bush, David Frum, he put it this way, instantly would plunge the country into a constitutional crisis. Liz Cheney, former Republican member of Congress, said just this morning that if Trump wins, he'll never leave. So what's Donald Trump's response to all of this? It's not me. It's President Biden that democracy should fear. Kristen, hearing from Liz Cheney this morning saying that if you vote for Trump, it could be the last election you ever get to vote in. What is behind this urgency we're now hearing from more and more Republicans?
But now he is saying that it is actually Joe Biden that is a threat to the country. And he's using an argument that he's used before, saying that the 4 indictments that he has been currently charged with are all because Joe Biden is using his position as president to weaponize the Justice Department and take it out on his political opponent, being Donald Trump.
Over the weekend, Trump did what Trump does. He took a weakness and tried to paint it as a problem for his adversary, saying it's actually Biden who threatens democracy.
First of all, his entire argument for why Biden is the threat to democracy is because of these 4 indictments that he's facing, saying that it is Biden who is weaponizing the Justice Department against his political enemy, being Donald Trump.
One of the things that we see happening today is a sort of a sleepwalking into dictatorship in the United States.
Wow, pretty powerful.
I think Liz's hatred of Trump is real. I understand why people don't like what he does and says at times, but in terms of actions and results, he was far better president for Biden. And if we have 4 more years of this, Liz Cheney, then we won't recognize America and the world will be truly on fire.
As Trump once notably said, quote, "I don't give a shit about NATO." That's my second shit. That's third. But
Congratulations.
Every time I'm quoting somebody, I think Trump. Every time I'm quoting Trump. Liz Cheney this morning on the Today Show, McKay, said that it's very possible that if Trump actually is returned to the White House, this might be the last presidential election in our lifetimes, because he could subvert the Constitution, subvert democracy.
Liz Cheney says the U.S. is sleepwalking into dictatorship, her words. Is there any reason to think Republican voters, though, are listening?
Well, there's one group of Republican voters that are not listening, and those are the Republican voters who are dedicated to Donald Trump and stick with him through thick and thin.
Well, I think that statement is hyperbolic. Personally, I guess I have more faith in our constitutional order and our institutions. I have more faith in our constitutional order and our institutions than perhaps Representative Cheney, who I respect greatly, is espousing right now.
Having worked in the White House, you spend the first week trying to find the restrooms. I mean, it's not an easy place to learn how to operate. So this guy winds up getting a bus. He doesn't know how to drive the bus. And so he spends the first 4 years learning how to drive the bus, and there were people in there who were slowing him down and putting up the guardrails. This time, that won't be the case. You got 4 years to get ready. He's got a team of weirdos and wackos who thought this thing through. And when he gets in there, he's going to know exactly what he wants to do, and now he knows how to drive the bus. If you thought he was going fast and furious the first time around, you've seen nothing on the second time around. And it's not just about, you never have another election. You thought that last ride was bumpy? This is going to be insane, and you might have any number of things happen to you and your family that could have been prevented by just good, orderly governing. That could happen to you, your family, your neighborhood. You have no idea what you're signing up for. You don't like Joe Biden, that's fine, but you don't put your family on a bus driven by a madman because you don't like the other bus driver.
He also appears to be making a concerted effort to accuse President Biden of what he himself stands accused of doing, undermining democracy.
Trump will immediately try to cloud the picture by pointing his finger at Joe Biden and accusing him of being anti-democratic, which is ridiculous. When he says Joe Biden is not the defender of democracy, you know that Joe Biden is the defender of democracy. Create the embryo of a fascistic, authoritarian, criminal party once he gets back into office. And Liz Cheney's got it absolutely right. If he gets back in, does any person think that really he would ever leave office again? If you believe that, you're just too innocent to be let out of the house by yourself. So the Democrats aren't perfect, but we are a party of democracy which believes that the government must be an instrument of the common good for the people and not an instrument for private self-enrichment of the president and his family and his buddies. And we know that's what they want to do because that's what they did before. That's what they've been doing ever since. And he wants to keep the grift going. And the problems on Earth are just way too serious. The world is on fire right now. We've got to deal with climate change. And the autocrats cannot save us. The kleptocrats, the plutocrats, the theocrats like Mike Johnson, they're not going to do it. It's only the Democrats at this point. So that is the basic frame for this election going into 2024.